open for.
Yeah.
We are live.
But state attorneys, they're different about it.
That's not
The cost of that will be small, but in the BAA, you said don't put.
We are live.
Anyway, I can.
Okay.
fill you in.
So this is the appropriations. February 4th. This is what left them I'm talking. And we're going to be back to the budget. Just ignore what do we do?
Language.
We're doing the language of the big.
No.
790 is the budget of this. I got my, yeah.
I can do that if you want.
We don't have that. Okay, so yes, since we have the budget adjustment act, you got a letter from the Secretary of Administration. So the Commissioner of Finance and Management is here to talk to us about that and other things that the House did to the governor's budget adjustment. Thank you.
Commissioner of Finance and Management, Adam Gresham, reporting for the ready to engage.
Okay,
So yes, you have, I believe on your, on the main page, the, two letters. One on policy that's written, and signed by the Secretary of Administration. And one on technical adjustments, which is written by yours truly. Actually, I think all of you guys have been pulling it up there. The technical adjustments is just that technical, the way we prefer to see legislative intent expressed in the document, but not policy related. The letter from the Secretary of Administration tends to be more policy focused. That's the difference between them. Mr. Chair, would you prefer I go over each, or would you want me to take?
maybe start with the Secretary's letter.
Sure.
And then if there's parts of the technical letter that you want to fold into to the main, which I think there's just three main or four.
So that
issues.
I can do that. There's one in particular, there's no intersection. So, first, I would say, we were very pleased, a main tenant, maybe the main tenant of the governor's budget adjustment was setting aside what amounted to almost $75 million of unallocated to be put in a temporary reserve, carried forward into fiscal 27 and transferred to the education fund. You will note in the governor's fiscal 27 budget, there is actually an amount that equals 115 million. A component of that, the main component of that was this 74.9 amount from the budget adjustment. And we were very happy, and we said so to the House, that they left that in a reserve. We were less enthused that they broadened the uses of that reserve, and I think they swiped the language from the $30 million. You'll remember last year that was $30 million contingent reserve. I think they just looked at that language, which can be used for property tax relief. It can also be used for federal funding, backfill, housing challenges, and other uses. And the governor was very specific. This is property tax relief, so we would ask that you consider the House broadening of the use of that. And I don't think I need to restate to this committee here. That's been a very really large focus on property tax relief. So anything that would kind of lessen the ability of the House, the Senate, and the governor to provide some relief, we consider moving on to action. So
We could still notwithstand it. I mean, but it just makes it clear. You just would appreciate that the same thing.
actually, with this line, we wouldn't even have to notwithstand it, but it does give you other options. So we were saying there's only one option.
Right. But even if you only give us one option, we can notwithstand the one option and do something.
But you guys would the law is the law.
Right, yeah.
So I think, that's the first point. The second point is, I think, the House, made, several, well, actually they made, let's say 7 or 8 additions to the governor's proposal. Most of those, I think, were one time in nature, but there were a number of them that they factored into the base. And, as the secretary says in her letter, these are all, what we support initiatives. I mean, non-emergency medical transport, giving, enhanced residential care facilities and AAA's, increases. But there are many things that we support that we opt ultimately either to do on a one-time basis because we're not sure we can sustain them, or not to do it all. So we just wanted to emphasize that I think, going into a period where we're going to challenge the base revenue. And so we're trying our best to keep expenses out of base expenses. I will acknowledge that these are small. Many of them are, I think there's 40,000, 30,000 and 20. I mean, these aren't huge expenditures, but small expenditures added to other small expenditures and compounded up. So we're not objecting to the intent. I mean, it's difficult to object to, but we just wanted to point out that we're very careful and base expenditures.
Does your technical letter offer a different way of wording it where it would be based? Or do you not address it?
It doesn't. But we could. I mean, it'd be 1,100 appropriation would probably be because they are factored into the 300s.
I thought I heard that it's difficult, that it's going to change like the rate, and so therefore that is kind of automatically be part of the base. This, I got the sense talking to somebody that it might be more difficult to switch it to the base because of the way they're funded or something, and the way the global commitment works or something like that.
I mean, you could have one-time expenditures that are available for federal match. That is an issue. But I think our feeling was we just need to be careful putting additional things into base and then be ongoing. It creates a 27 days pressure. So you need, if you accept the House version, you would need to then increase by that amount. FY27 budget too. So, and
We'd have to do that whether it was based or.
well, if it's a one-time supplemental payment of the like, you wouldn't need to do that. I mean, that would be considered, one time, whatever. It's a one time. Big work done. Probably. And then, you missed a good part.
Oh, I can look at it on YouTube.
And then the housing authority assistance, here too, as the letter states, providing financial assistance to housing authorities that operate Section 8 programs. It's difficult to argue against that. We're aware that they are stressed. We had a couple of requests for change. The first being that we again would like to be clear that this is a one-time expenditure, and we're just worried that this will become an ongoing expense. And I just see very nervous that we can sustain this completely. So, but as it's written, it is. So that's not a complaint of ours. But we just want to be clear that this is, I think, a worthy expenditure and be a good use of the set aside. I think more, and this kind of where it starts to intersect on the technical side. It's just it's an unusual structure, taking a $5 million carve out, $50 million appropriation, and then ensuring in language that it carries forward until fully used or reverted. It just from an accounting or control standpoint, it's a little challenging to do that. You have this subcomponent of a larger appropriation that you would have to kind of account for separately and allow to carry forward separately. We just thought an easier way to do it that maintains the intent, in fact makes it more clear, is just go back to I guess it would be Act 27, and the original $50 million appropriation is. And just cross out 50 million and put in 45 million. And then add to Act 27 a new appropriation for $5 million to cover the Section 8 voucher program. That would be our preferred and frankly the easiest way. That way it's separate, it's clear, it's accounted for, it answers legislative intent clearly, but from accounting standpoint, it's much easier to follow. I think the final comment before asking for questions is that I think, and Senator Perchik, I think you had a conversation on this. We would be much happier if the appropriation made to DCF they have experience with voucher programs. We also called out to the ACCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, and as always, Alex Barrel, Commissioner, can do type. He said they'd make it happen, but they too would be they don't have experience with voucher programs. They have plenty of experience with federal government and federal funding for housing, but they don't have experience with actually implementing or operating programs. So all in, I think DCF, we prefer, if you agree with the House language, two things. One, make it its own appropriation, $5 million, and reduce the other appropriations from 50 to 45. And two, to make the appropriation to DCF OEO administered with the cooperation, say, of DHC. That would be our preference for this. If you, again, ignore this. So
We've had another technical change in that section 79, where you don't refer to the 50 million about that shall spending authority appropriate shall carry forward. Do we need that if you have that section 86 that carry forward section that says it all goes?
in other words, if you have a new appropriation, then you could put that language in there. If it's part of the 50 million, that's already
Right.
point. That's
So if you need it in the $5 million appropriation, the whole bill has this section 86 that carry forward.
Oh. Yeah, you could use the same or not. That's something that if you wanted to put in legislative intent that shall be carried forward to use or refer that, we're fine with that. We make the point that if it's kept within the 50 million, it's just really not needed.
I guess this doesn't reference. No, it's just. I mean, it doesn't hurt, but it would be seems repetitive.
The final thing in the policy letter is read Vermont. I think you will. Here, I don't know if you've spoken already to the Agency of Education, but the secretary will be very articulate on the need for read Vermont. This program, she's near and dear to her heart. They actually are running program currently. However, it's kind of financially out of my support. They're running out of funding. They would like to continue it for another year. So because they're running low on revenue, they asked to be put in the budget adjustment. If need be, we could use DAB 26s, which is a way to move money from one party agency to another to keep them, at least get them lifeline through the end of the year. But aside from the kind of the technical or funding aspect, this is a I'm not the best person to speak on it, but in a broad sense, it's teaching teachers how to teach literacy, which is an area I think we have flagged as an area of flagging. And so this is a program that she's very happy with. Anyway, she would be a much better person to talk to. I think the House said they didn't hear about it, and they felt comfortable considering it in the fiscal 27 budget. They didn't have enough information or time to consider it. I would acknowledge that, on the other hand, and strongly encourage you to consider it for FY 27 if you want to go. Sanitary is very, police is important.
Well, we'll have Secretary Saunders in to talk about it.
Perfect.
Anything else?
Just a couple of technical notes in the technical letter. The first couple we're just asking for kind of guidance, we'll call it intent language. I think the first one is more along, as you see in the explanation, just AHS was looking for a little more clarity rather than just for supplemental non-emergency medical transport. They just wanted to say to increase payments for it, meaning it's not supplemental, it's just regular payments at a higher level. They thought that would make it just easier for them to ensure funds could be used for the federal Medicaid match. So it's really just a slight change in language. The section further down, there was, you may have noticed there's $30,000 increase in Dale's base in section B 330, and that is intended for the Vermont Center for Independent Living, which a Meals on Wheels program they operate for people with disabilities, I believe. And make comments about our worry about that being the base, but aside from that, if that is the intent of the Senate too, we would just ask you to state it outright. Right now, what the House has done is they've given us $30,000 of base, which we can spend on anything we damn well please. And I think the intent would be that I think you would want us to spend that. So just state it. It just provides guidance. And the next one, kind of along a similar line, there was a carve out. You'll remember there was a 14.5 million total global commitment to Dale for emergency financial relief that was appropriated to Dale on a one-time basis. What the House did was carve out of that 14.5 million a small amount for the area agencies on aging, and additionally for the enhanced residential care facilities. And then the balance of that 14.5 remains for emergency financial relief. We're just asking to state that it would just be, I think, easier for the agency of human services, and particularly when they're considering, federal match, to state how this is what this money is used. So,
Okay. This is also part of your base concern.
yeah. The next section in the technical letter, I'm going to ask, as they say, for leave of the House, leave of the Senate, and withdraw. I think it's, we're talking about the year-end contract. That's on the child care contribution. There are two components of the child care contribution reserve. Two comments on that child care contribution.
So that's just, it's not section 55.
Yeah, that one is, I'm going to say, if we can skip over that and maybe finance and management will work with the joint fiscal office and put our heads together to figure out whether it does need to change or not. Every time I read it, I come to a different conclusion, and I figured, you know what, I think we may be good. So it's really my error for putting that in there initially. It must have been when I put it in there. That must have been the time when I said we gotta have this, and then maybe I went to sleep and woke up the next morning and decided we didn't have it stuffed.
Right. There's two sections that you have.
The next one, though, the section 58 change, I think it is important, and I think we get the intent, and we'll make sure that happens. But I think there's a, in the House language, maybe a bit of a confusion. We created, along with your joint fiscal office a year-end construct that would make sure payments into the general fund from the child care, from the payroll tax were not subject to the year-end waterfall. Remember, if we have surplus, it goes half to the balance reserve, the other half to the Portsmouth state employees and the teacher's pension. And in fact, there is money that will be in the general fund, almost certainly, because there's the child care or the payroll tax that's paid in. But it sits in the general fund until tax reconciles it with quarterly payments, which doesn't happen until, I think it may even be as late as September. It's a number of weeks, if not months afterwards. So in the meantime, we closed that. It's a timing issue, really, that I certainly didn't think about when this payroll tax was instituted. So we created with Joint Fiscal Office, we worked together and created a construct that you see here. But what that is intended to do is to kind of put a reserve, a fence around what we estimate to be, not what we know to be, but what we estimate to be the component of the general fund balance that is due to the payroll tax. And we did that actually this year in, the dark of night. Finance and actually tax sat down and we called them and said, what do you think it's going to be? Because we need to take that out of the general fund or it's going to be subject to the waterfall. And so tax came up with, I think, a perfectly reasonable estimate of what they thought it would be. We put that in a reserve. And then on July 1, we unreserved it, went back into the general fund. That's essentially what this construct does, although it requires a consensus estimate of what that amount is going to be. And the first year or so, it's kind of difficult. We don't have history. I think years from now, we'll look back with pretty strong conviction and say, well, we'll take in X amount. But the first year, we're not sure whether there's a seasonality to these payments. We don't know. So it took on a kind of a heightened sense of figuring out what that would be. So this construct essentially repeats our process, only we do it with the Legislative Joint Fiscal Office, so we're both in it together, so you don't think those widely folks in finance and management pull the fast one. But after the year ends and the new year starts, that money immediately is dropped back into the general fund. But this language says, and transfer an amount equal to that, to the actual receipts to the child care contribution special fund. We can't do that because we don't know what those receipts are yet, right? So that, this will allow that to happen. That's the construct we created, but we can't put it back in the general fund and transfer whatever amount's supposed to be in there because we don't know what that amount is yet. It's going to be hopefully close to what we estimate. The chances are it'll never be exactly what we estimate, but it will be close. And by the way, the construct also creates a process that would mitigate if we guess too low or mitigate if we guess too high. So that the child care contribution fund will always be made whole. They'll always get the exact amount. But if we guess low, and there do more, it would come out of the balance reserve. If we guess high and we reserve too much, then it'll go into the waterfall. So anyway, that's the construct, but we would just encourage you to just take out that transfer because we don't know what that amount is. So that I believe is the last. Yeah.
Okay. Pretty straightforward.
The rest of the technical items you'll see, it creates the two appropriations, the 45 million, which we dropped from 50 million, and the new 5 million, which is we show you how we would do that.
It's 6 pages, one of the shortest technical letters.
You guys do good work. We really thank you. I gotta say that before made this comment, yeah, instead of Cassidy, I should talk about the DAA to our administration. I said, for a document that is very long on bookkeeping and very short on addition, it's just shocking how long it takes to get that process. So the legislative process is kind of, takes a little while.
As its pros and cons.
So there you have it, Mr. Chair.
Can I ask you a question about a section that's not new?
Absolutely.
It's just that, this section I brought up before, section 86, is carried forward language.
Yes.
Which gives Secretary of Administration permission basically to carry it forward instead of getting reverted. What would happen if we didn't? What if we didn't have section 86 in the?
That would be interesting. So
Because right now everything gets reverted
by law,
right by law, but
in the
this
statute, everything reverts at the end of the year.
and this basically notwithstands that and says you can carry it on.
She or he has the authority to,
And you can carry it on.
and you wouldn't want.
Has it always been? I mean, why did we say it needed to be reverted and then put this in there? Was there ever a time that it didn't get carried forward by the secretary?
Not in my understanding. Someone you require someone who's been here.
Been there for predating all of us.
So like the 1800s, like something.
Well, Richie probably is our longest tenured, maybe Senator Lyons,
I
but
can't remember it never
I can't
not being.
the issue is, I mean, if we didn't have it in there, and the secretary didn't have, you'd want someone to have the authority. And you don't want it. I mean,
Because why would that?
well, because you'd have to sit down and listen to a
Each
line of departments saying, could I carry, and a lot,
$10.48 or whatever.
or whatever it is, but a lot of one-time appropriations in particular that are made, late in the year or so on, they haven't had a chance to dig into them, those are automatic, right? Because they've only had a month or more to, but there are many others that take a number of years to go through. There are a number of departments that have small, sometimes not so small base amounts left over, and it's a long process. I mean, I think it's a good question that probably, if I just coming in the back of my head, it's probably 300 to 400 lines.
Right.
And I'm just telling you,
I don't want to do that.
you don't want to do that. But I mean,
Is there
all of
anything that
our-
gets automatically reverted or does this construct take into account everything?
the construct, so there are appropriations that are automatically carried forward, and that's in not statute, but in session law. You often will say, like, for example, we were just talking about
It's
this.
just that,
So it's not infrequent that you'll put in the 5 million to whatever, Department of Finance and Management to do XYZ and shall be carried forward. So those are automatically carried forward, but the reversions, yeah, there are some that we let revert. Nothing that just happens kind of without us.
I didn't look for like the list looks like it covers everything. What isn't what gets reverted that's not covered by this construct?
But anything that's not in there.
So just
So the three main funds are,
I guess it's like all the little special.
yeah, the three main funds are there, and there are smaller funds and special funds where it, automatic
They do give.
to their bottom line, not to the general fund. Special funds, they stay special.
Sometimes it'll say that any funds will stay in the fund. Will carry forward and stay there. Do they need to say that, or that just belts and suspenders to keep people away from thinking about they could steal it?
And generally, the stay in the fund language is implied interest payments or interest. That's generally what you shall stay in, but otherwise
It gets reverted to
the fund itself. We don't revert it to the general. Stays in the special.
the. That was my only question. I don't have any other questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, you can't have questions for me now.
Okay.
He said he only had a question for me, but he's not allowed to ask me.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
That's all we should. And the only thing, Commissioner, about that basin one time, we might want your opinion on how you would word it. It is okay.
All right.
So that will- I mean, maybe we'll talk to JFO if there's an issue there or not.
That's fair.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I'd like the picture of us from the top.
I don't know.
Age that.
I don't know what, well, Norris tried to take the camera, so we had to go to that camera. So,
Well,
maybe,
Elle said to me that you made the decision because
that's not true.
You're allowed to make the final decision.
Oh, I-
I was told by Patrick and IT that it is your decision if you want it on the other.
I like the one up with you down.
I like drone view.
The drone, yes.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's the one that I like.
May I hit it again?
Okay, well, we'll have a point
That's
discussion
why-
about which camera angle to use.
I thought Elle went rogue and just switched it out, but apparently authorized.
No, that was just the camera broke. Because Norris knocked it over.
That was my quick thinking, thank you.
So under committee discussion, we had talked about the pilot fund and there's some legislation about the pilot fund. So we asked Mr. Root to come up and talk about the pilot fund, and he has a handout.
Morning, everyone. Picture joint fiscal. There is a handout, as the chair said, that explains the pilot fund and, I will walk you through this at sort of a high level. I'm really trying to focus on what the BAA is doing in relation to the pilot fund. You heard a presentation from my colleague Ted, 2 Fridays ago about like how pilot payments are calculated, and like, he's your expert on that. I'm not. But I really want to focus on just like the accounting mechanics about what's going on in the pilot special fund. I just want to remind everybody that this special fund, where does the money come from? It comes from the 25% share of local option tax revenue. So when a town elects to levy a local option tax on a commercial activity that occurs within its borders, the town can retain 75% of the proceeds. 25% goes to the pilot special fund.
And is that like 26, the first year it's 25%?
Correct. So if you see online, look, let's start on the chart on the left side, on line 17, you see all the revenues dip down from 14.88.
What line 17 are you talking about?
Or, I'm sorry, line 11. I'm just wrong. Line 11.
Everybody worked up?
Thank you, Senator Westman.
I'm just saying,
Oh.
I have a fellow account, so.
I forgot that I actually numbered the lines and I was like looking at the thing in Excel, but where you see that drop from the 14.88 to the 14.57 on projected revenue, that's because that change took effect for the second quarter of FY
And it's
26.
from 30 to.
Right, I went from 70-30 to 75-25. So that's the amount, that's the revenue source we're talking about here. That money goes into a special fund, the pilot special fund. You all in the budget every year make appropriations out of that special fund to pay for the pilot payments to municipalities that have state-owned buildings and universities. This is not the ANR pilot, this is for the state buildings. Montpelier is included in that general pilot total. There's also some funding for correctional facility pilot. And every once in a while, you'll make some one-time appropriations out of the fund. So the first 3 lines, lines 2, 3, and 4, sort of represent the ongoing annual pilot obligations out of the fund. You know, about $500,000 a year or so.
And those are just set by statute, like for corrections, it's
Correct.
$40,000 a year, and we would have to.
Yeah, I'm not, yeah, you set that in the budget and there's a formula and it's, yeah, but you occasionally also, in addition to those, 12.5 million or so of recurring payments, to the pilot programs, you occasionally make some one-time appropriations out of the fund. And in the current fiscal year, you might remember that there was $1 million to the municipal grand list stabilization program to help towns deal with the impacts to their grand lists of buyouts of flood-prone properties. That $1 million is going to trickle out over a period of time. And the expected expenditure columns here on these charts were put together with the help of our colleagues from the tax department. So I'm trying to compare the appropriations and what is actually expected to be spent out of the fund. So there's sort of 2 moving parts to pay attention to here. The governors recommend for the BAA included a $500,000 one-time appropriation from the pilot fund to the tax department to help with some telecom valuation work. That was related to Act 145 that you all passed 2 years ago, which repealed the telephone tax. That was a pretty antiquated small tax and shifted telecom property and communications property to the grand list. Pretty complicated process. The tax department is working with the vendor, and they would expect that $500,000 appropriation would be spent down over about 3 years. So I highlighted that in yellow as just one of those moving parts in the VAA. The House did concur with that, so you see that in H790. Those of you on the transportation committees might remember that last year you shifted the town highway non-federal disaster appropriation from the T fund over to the pilot fund, 1.15 million a year. That was done for FY26. The finance and management authorized an excess receipt to V-Trans to allow them to spend an extra 360 out of that fund, 360,000 out of that fund to deal with 2 additional invoices to towns this year. And finance and management had proposed that V-Trans find the money within its budget to pay the pilot fund back for that money. The House did not agree with that. The House instead allowed the it was like 292,000 from the T fund to revert and remain in the T fund given the condition of the fund. And the House also reverted the 67,000 roughly of general fund and swept it into the general fund. Long way of saying that the pilot fund ate that extra $360,000 of cost in that line in FY26. So if you go over to the right side of the chart, you will see on line 7 that AOT town highway non-federal disaster line, that 1.51 million is 360,000 and change higher than it is on the left side because of that. The last thing I wanted to draw your attention to was the governor's recommended FY27 budget recommends shifting $3.41 million of costs at the tax department for grand list support for reappraisals and listing payments to towns. That $3.41 million has been paid out of the general fund, and the governor has proposed shifting that to the pilot fund because these costs benefit towns by helping them maintain their grand lists. This is the per parcel payment comes out of this line. There's some appeals assistance for complex valuations. There's some lister training costs. The House decided to take that construct that the governor recommended in FY27 and begin it in the FY26 BAA. So they shifted that $3.41 million of costs off the general fund over to the pilot fund, therefore freeing up $3.41 million in the general fund that can be used elsewhere in the BAA. The most notable example of how that money was used was the $3 million reserve for the teacher pension to deal with the reduced expectation on the federal contributions. So that's how the House accommodated that in the BAA. What I want to show you is that over on the right side, the pilot special fund ended FY25 with a surplus of $15 million. And we expect that with all of these changes that are proposed, the fund would end FY27 with about $11.6 million. So the surplus would be fairly healthy, and that would still be higher than where the fund ended FY24, which was about $10.3 million. A few things to keep in mind here that aren't on the chart is that we try to budget those pilot payments conservatively so that there's a sufficient appropriation to make sure every town gets what the formula says they should, because if you don't do that and the appropriation's not enough, then everybody's payments get prorated. So actual costs are likely to come down a little lower than the $12.2 million. Another thing I wanted to point out is that we expect revenues will continue to increase in future years as more towns adopt local option taxes. And it's hard to predict that before town meeting, but we expect the revenue picture is going to continue to be pretty strong in the fund.
Senator Weston.
Well, that was going to be my question. I have 3 communities that are talking about local option taxes now.
Yeah.
and one of the communities is above what the set limit, the 1%.
Mhm.
They're going to 2% or trying to in that. Is that calculated? That's calculated in here?
We don't calculate what towns might be doing. We base the estimates based on what towns have adopted them and what is in place now, because some towns have changed their mind and they've adopted and then repealed. So, that goes to, you get a better sense after town meeting week, what towns are expected to, be pursuing local option taxes and by when. But the tax department has indicated in testimony to other committees that there's several towns that are exploring doing additional local option taxes this year in town meeting.
I'm gonna say this out, and part of this comes as chair of the transportation committee, where 70 to 80% of every single town's budget, except for a few large ones, but goes for roads. It goes to, and we've been terrible at funding local towns. It's a 2% increase for local towns. As I look at this and I see us beginning to piecemeal all the money that's coming into this, and particularly when they're going above the 1%, should we not have a consistent formula that says we're going to distribute at least a piece of the local option tax to all towns, maybe through for local roads or highway? What's happening here, in my view, is that, and I'm going to my hometown, which has a ski area. I've got Stowe that want, or what, we've got Stowe. That wants to go to 3%. I've got Morristown that's looking to raise, Morristown is gonna raise 1.2 million and put 800,000 of it into their town roads. And over a 5-year plan to bring them. And as I back out of this, I look out and say all of the towns that are smaller that have no ability to raise revenue get left behind. And they're the ones that do all the shopping and going to restaurants in Stowe, going to Williston, doing that. And would it not be a time to start to look at this and say, if there's going to be growth beyond the 1%, and this is a real growing area, should we consider that the 25%, but we develop a formula to think about a piece, at least a piece of this should be go on to help all the towns.
Yeah, I think your question is well taken. One of the things that I would point out is under the current sort of revenue projections going into the pilot fund, and based on these proposed shifts of expenditures and what we think the ongoing costs of the pilot payments to towns will be, there is very little room in the pilot fund to put an additional significant recurring annual expense in under the current revenue picture. Having said that, that picture will likely change in the future as more towns come online with local option taxes to the extent that they do. And if towns do want to do something above and beyond the current law, 1% local option tax, I think the opportunity is right to have a conversation about how you treat that money. Whether you route it through the same system or.
I look at Stowe and say, I'm not into dipping into what they already do, but if they want to go to 2%, should we not say that a portion of those increases and the going forward, not the looking back to anybody, but the pieces going forward, if I could dedicate that specifically to help communities with their roads in every community across the state, we've been woefully inadequately helping them. And if I look at the last 5 years, we've had 60% increase in construction costs for the state. And we've been increasing for local roads by 2% a year. You can't tell me that the towns haven't faced the same kind of increase. And the bump up in this whole picture, when you're having double-digit increases on the education side, I've got communities that aren't keeping their roads up because they can't pass budgets.
I think, Senator, what I hear you saying is there's an opportunity to have a conversation around if towns were to increase, sort of do something above and beyond the existing 1%. How do you deal with that second percent in a way that makes sense for road infrastructure? I think that's a robust
I
conversation.
don't want to do anything with the existing formula for the existing piece. But if they're gonna go forward,
Okay, center line,
Well, I mean, I was just thinking that the original local options tax was to offset some of the loss of education property taxes as a result of Act 60. And we know that we currently have a very high need for school capital expenditures. So theoretically, either a percentage of the remaining amount or a new tax could also be, I don't want to say new tax, but you could use it 80% of that $11 million and put it into a capital construction fund.
Here's the robust discussion.
So there's a robust
There-
discussion.
There are, I've heard many robust discussions around this building about ideas on how to help municipalities with the pilot fund.
Yeah.
I would add
Sure.
words to the list.
I would just suggest though, that at this time, but it looks to me like is we're beginning to nickel and dime. And do we wanna, should we not have a fuller discussion?
2% based on the economic output for the individual community, so the communities for income.
Well, you served on a select board for years.
I know.
A lot of it was roads.
Oh, it is. I mean, it definitely is.
Chris, center north.
Is there a ceiling on the option tax?
1% under current law.
1% current law?
Yeah.
So when Stowe is asking to go 2%, we'd have to change the statute on that.
I'm not an attorney, but that's my understanding.
That's not quite right.
Is it in the
They have-
charter or?
No, they have a charter and they're approaching it. And they're going to bring a charter for us for approval.
Right.
So we just have to approve it through charter.
That's the way typically, until last year, when you all changed the funding form, the ratio to the 75-25, most of the time when towns were going to put in a local option, it was the charter amendment.
And the charter allows you to go outside the existing law.
We'll go past the 1%. So this number you have in front, parenthetical, down is about 3.7.
That was my crude math to show the cost change between what the governor recommended and what was reflected in the House BAA, and that is the addition of that 368,000 and change from the town highway non-federal disasters, plus that $3.4 million, $3.41 million of tax.
And now do I understand the chart correctly that every year giving these numbers or spending like 2.1 million more than we bring in?
I wouldn't say that every year, because some of this is spend down
Right.
one-time appropriations that's gonna occur in different periods of time. The recurring lines under current law are lines 2, 3, and 4. And if you all were to make the change the governor's proposing around the reappraisal payments, one is the recurring ones.
So it would be more than the estimated tax. I mean, it would slowly eat away at that.
For a little bit, and then,
If there's more local.
correct. And again, that 12.2 is conservatively budgeted, and, my understanding is that what the governor had recommended with putting that 3.41 into this fund, the tax department was comfortable that the pilot fund would be able to support that for the future based on how they project revenues and expenditures are likely to trend.
It would be 3.4 every year, but I guess it would be part of it. This would follow the Act 73 plan on doing reappraisal of each?
No, this is really, this is payments to towns for grand list, maintenance. They get a proposal fee every year.
Okay, it's not the reappraisal.
No, that's
part
a
of that.
different, that's a different. And that 3.41 will fluctuate a little bit from year to year. It's been pretty stable.
So this is just to help them maintain their databases and whatever they needed.
Yeah, and
Reappraisal for the grand list, the next 73 would come out of some other fund.
that's my understanding. And they also do, some help with some towns for really complex litigation. Precisely, and some of the strict training and things like that. The tax department can give you a robust rundown of that section of their department when they come in.
And do you know off the top of your head, did transportation in their budget, put the 1.5 in their budget for the non-designated disasters for local highways?
That revenue would stay in the T fund and drop to the bottom line and help them end FY 26 in less of a deficit than they're currently
No, I'm
projecting.
talking about their FY 27 budget.
This doesn't impact their FY 27 budget.
I'm not saying it does. What I'm asking is, did they put in their FY 27 budget $1 million, which they used to do before last year, that would kind of come from the.
Oh, I'm sorry, you were asking me a different question.
Right.
The
I'm just
the
asking
1.15 million for town highway non-federal disasters in the gov rec for next year is back in the T fund.
Okay, that's it. Okay.
Along those lines, do they know that, they're getting an extra $360,000?
They do.
It's in there.
Well, they've been told that the House has done that,
Okay.
but that is not
It's not,
earmarked for an additional project. My understanding is that would help them, help cushion the
Yeah.
pretty severe issue they have and hopefully lessen their reliance on federal indirects by a little bit of money next year.
Yeah.
So I think the committee felt that given the state of the different funds, that if the pilot fund was having a surplus and the other funds were not, that they disagreed with finance management.
another question for, Senator Westman, I think.
Sure.
If I may.
Yeah.
The the option, 1% additional LOT that they're looking at. Are they on a fast track for that or
They're voting on it.
this March?
You can ask the, they're voting on it in March.
And they're hoping that they would get approval this year.
Okay, well,
But it seems like that necessitates some of the Westman's robust conversation.
I think
yeah,
if they're successful, it's going to be pushed beyond, and they won't be the only ones. And the problem is, because Morrisville, just north of them, is voting on a 1%. Cambridge is talking about 1%. This is just my view. But as they do that and they do a round, I would dare say that 90% of the people that work in Stowe live someplace, live in the feeder towns around, and they're all dying. And they can't keep up their roads either. So how would I distribute this money, and at least take a piece and, more fairly distribute it out? I certainly think the town that is the host town, that at the base gets what they get. I wouldn't touch any of that, but if you're gonna go beyond that, should it, instead of 75%, should maybe you get 50% and 25% get shared and we do, but is it not time to have that as a discussion, particularly when we're having surpluses here and it looks like we're picking this apart?
and just to bolster your idea and maybe expedite the conversation. I mean, I think it was on Channel 3 News last night, the night before, where they were talking about towns actually giving up town roads because they can't afford to maintain them. To, and turning them into private roads and houses with 2 or 3 houses on a road. So, I mean, that's what they're resorting to at this point. They're so strapped.
Yeah, all right, the robust.
Yeah.
I'm saying this is a big place in transportation. This is.
Well.
Basically, we have a four.
Yeah. We have more. Who did that?
Well, we got a couple of
You did.
additional.
We have to have a quorum of the committee and commit.
Yeah.
Oh, we do?
Um,
Oh,
We can do all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
Okay, anything else for Mr. Root? Pilot? Okay, thank you for the.
Thank you.